Hello everyone, and welcome to Plugin of the Week. Point Blank's live weekly broadcast. We're live from our hub in East London. Today is the last week of the term, actually the last day of the term. Students are doing a lot of one-to-one tutorial. This is what's happening during week 11. So in various studios, students are checking project with their instructors, getting feedback, direct feedback. So it's a bit quieter just because of that. We've got students jamming in Studio 3 in the singing room today as part of their performance. So there's still things going on at Point Blank today, but as you noticed, it's just a little bit quieter. So today, in this week, Plugin of the Week, I'm going to look at Plugin Alliance BX console. Some of you may already know it. It's a channel strip from Plugin Alliance, designed by Brainworks, coded by Brainworks. And we've gone through a few of those channel strip or console emulation throughout some of our previous episodes of Plugin of the Week. This one is a little bit different in the sense that it's a full-on channel strips. So if we go to my computer, what I've done is I've inserted on every single channel. So let's open one instance of BX console. Let's say I'm going to open the one that I've got on the lead synth here. No, maybe not. Let's open the lead vocal here. So as you can see, it's a full-on channel strip, and it has many features. It's a great plugin. First note, what is it based on? It's based on a classic Neve, quite a rare Neve console actually, the Neve VXS, which is quite a rare console. This one in particular was modeled on one that was used at Skywalker Studios, recording a lot of pretty classic soundtrack. What they've done, the particular aspect of the design of that console is the fact that it's a tolerance modeling technology that has been applied. What it means is that on a real hardware console, not every single channel of an analog desk, sound exactly the same. Why? It's because electronic components are, although they're designed the same, they're going to have a slight variation. And the variation, which we call tolerance, can be anything between 10, 20, maybe let's say 1% up to 20%. 20% being very different in the case of a console, obviously. Therefore, what it means is that if you were putting the same source audio onto channel 1 or channel 2, you may end up having quite a very different outcome, output sounding quite different. So Brainwork, what they've done is they've modeled over 150 components, and basically they've modeled the 72 channels. So effectively, you've got the 72 channel of that desk, and that makes quite a bit of a difference between every channel sounding exactly everything the same. I think that little variation is part of what makes analog summing what it is. It has something a little bit different, and sometimes you can't really put your finger on what it is that is different. It's just that those channels are a little bit different. So, I mean, today is about looking at this plugin as an overview, and obviously there are sales going on at the moment, so check it out. There's a 14 days demo as well, full demo, so you can download it. So the idea behind it is that if you insert it on every single channel on your desk, like I've done here, you're going to end up with effectively as if I was going through a mixing console, but in the box. So let's have a listen. I've got this track here, and then the console is on. And I have to say, when it's set with nothing on, I think the outcome is quite very subtle. I mean, you need very good monitoring system to hear the difference, and if at the moment on the stream with the compression of the MP3, you may not quite get it. So I would strongly advise, download the plugin if you're interested, check it out really carefully on headphones, on the best monitoring system you have, etc. And then I think you will hear, what it does. So I've selected all my channels so I can hear the difference. That's without, and that's with. I've obviously made no changes whatsoever to the channel, so obviously there's not much going on. So, you could ask, why shall I have that? It's quite subtle. And I think what I love about a channel strip is first of all the fact that you're going to have a semi-Q across everything, across every single channel, and that helps to get things, in that world. Mixing is about getting a glue, getting a mix to gel together. So I think that having a console like this, and in real world, in studios using hardware, often we would use the EQ of the desk as the primary one, but there would be special EQs, like a pool tech or something a little bit special that we would use for a specific instrument, maybe the bass or the lead vocal, obviously, and that doesn't stop you from doing that in the box. But the idea of having this full console here, I really like that idea. So, as you can see here, when I've inserted it, something to be aware of. When you insert, to insert on every single channel, you select effectively all the channel you want to insert and drop it down. But what it does is that when I did that, I found out that, and maybe I didn't go about it the right way, and maybe there's a trick on a shortcut to do that, but all my channels were 1 and 2. So what I ended up doing, going through every single channel, I wanted to replicate that. So my kick, track 1 is channel 1 and 2. I mean, they're all stereo track, and normally they wouldn't. Again, it was just for ease of use. I've got this quick demo, so I wanted to use that. Then we've got channel 3 and 4 here. So you can change them here, basically, you noticed. And then each channel, so, if you wanted to experiment, take one signal, put one on and flick through every individual channel, and you will hear there will be a difference, and that the TMT standing for tolerance modeling technology. So let's start looking at what do we have available on those channels. I'm gonna deselect here. I'm gonna focus on my lead vocal.
It was his hood, and that was his only pops. Only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop. It's all he got, looked heavy in trepidation.
So what are the features interesting on this? I'm going to start with the input, actually. That's your input gain, like you would have on a desk. So you could drive that a bit.
Now he the one who cannot put down the light.
I mean, typically of an Eve, you have a lot of headroom, so you're not really getting that drive. So again, it's different from others. Simulation design plugins that are doing that, simulation, emulation of a vintage or analog desk. What is interesting, what Brainworks have done, which I find really interesting, is this V gain. The V gain is effectively the amount of noise. By default, it's set at minus 85 dB. If I click on here, and if you move it here and I click Alt, I reset it, it's minus 85 dB. Is the noise floor. So that means you can hear the noise, typically of an analog desk. At minus 85 dB SPL, you hear the noise, it's subtle, but you hear it. And I could demonstrate that. What you can do is it can go literally from minus 120 dB up to minus 70 dB noise floor. Minus 70, you will hear the noise, it's the hiss that, part of the analog signal. So you can dose that how much you want of it. What I like also about the analog function of the stereo mode means that here you can see left and right are the same channel, identical, whereas in its digital mode, analog, it's 2 different channels, and it makes sense because if you think of back in, working on a desk that doesn't have stereo channels, you have 2 mono that effectively are becoming stereo. So you're using 2 mono channel and pan them left, right, hard left and hard right, and that's your 2 channels. So that really interesting as well to hear that. So let's look at some of the function here.
It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn.
So here we've got a low pass and high pass, and you can click on the button or double click. So let's put that. I've got my high pass filter here. I'm setting it, variable from 30 to 315 hertz. You can multiply that, which means that suddenly it's 3 times higher. And it's the same here for the low pass filter. You can divide it by 3. So again, the range is 18K to 7.5K, but you can divide that by 3. Quite interesting. So I'm putting that on the vocal. Then we've got our dynamic section here, which is quite really comprehensive actually. To activate the gate, you press on gate here. And obviously, if I'm starting adding noise everywhere, typically those desks, on analog desk, you would always at least have a bit of expander because just that little noise floor, you want to gate it out, and you can do that. So as soon as you start using analog mode on this, you should really put the gate on. And so
It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn.
And you see here, when it closes,
it's all he got.
I've got an update for Flash. Let's get rid of that.
And
And that's my expansion, or in that mode, it's expansion mode. And as you're getting closer here, this is kind of a second threshold which is related to the actual threshold here. So to keep it simple to start with, I'm going to go threshold.
It was his hood, and that was his only
Obviously
pops,
here,
only one that
minus
ever gave a damn,
25.
but knew it had to stop.
And I
It's
can
all he
even
got,
pull it
heavy intrepidation, the
and
baby
changing
was
the
far
range
hotter
to
than
minus by
Serengeti
30
Nation,
dB.
already
So, you know, you've got a
chasing,
wide
put him
range
up
of
and right
dynamic here
goods.
that you can
So he
select
do
by
nothing
using the
like this, so
pull
he could
and
spike
push.
her. Swore he do no wrong and never ever would be like her. Now he the one who cannot.
Obviously here, starting to, you know, gate everything. So you set up your gate roughly where you want it.
It's all he got, cloaked heavy intrepidation. The baby on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation, already chasing what could put him up in right goods.
That is your range. So range of 50 dB here.
It was his hood, and that was
It's
his only pops, only one that ever
It's fully
gave a
closing
damn,
it, you know,
knew
we
it
start
had to
not
stop.
hearing anything.
It's all he got, cloaked heavy intrepidation. The baby on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation, already chasing what could put him up in right goods.
So the range only works if that is in mode, gate mode. If you're on expansion, then the range becomes irrelevant because expansion is kind of a softer version of a gate, if you like.
It was his
So now I'm going to set up my threshold.
block hotter than Serengeti Nation, already chasing what could put him up in right goods. So he do nothing like this, so he could
Works
spike
quite
her.
well.
So
Then obviously you've got a pull, and so if you wanted to, you could cut, you know, close the gate at all time, or leave it slightly open. Again, it depends on the musicality, depends what you need. I like to leave a little bit through usually. I don't like a full-on closing gate. I find that a little bit just too abrupt for my liking. But it depends on the source, really depends on the material. Fast attack, and that's your release for the gate. So pretty cool. And then you've got the key, which obviously sidechaining the gate. And then here you've got this invert button, which basically you hear instead what is being gated. And obviously in that sense nothing, because when it's gated it's closed on the vocal. But it can be interesting to use this inverse. I've tried it with live drum, and you know, with live drum, when you've got multi-mic'd live drum, there's a lot of bleed on the snare, on the kick mic. Kick is going to go on the snare is going to go on other mics. So you can do interesting things here by inverting, and you're getting a slightly, completely different sense of what you're doing and shaping the dynamic of the sound. So something to bear in mind. Here is the limiter compressor. So here's your compressor. You've got the gain makeup, the threshold. You've got here the ratio. And if you pull, that's a fast compressor attack or a slower attack, and that's your release.
It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it
Starting
had
to
to
compress
stop.
a bit more.
It's all he got, cloaked heavy intrepidation. The baby on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation, already chasing what could put him up in right goods. So he do nothing like this, so he could spike her. Swore he do no wrong and never ever would be like her. Now he the one who cannot put down a light. It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop. It's all he got, cloaked heavy intrepidation. The
interesting.
baby
Let's
on his
have a
block
listen
hotter
now,
than
bypass.
Serengeti Nation, already chasing what could put him up in right goods. So he do nothing like this, so he could spike her. Swore he do no wrong and never ever would be like her.
Compression is a really nice compressor. Quite versatile in what you can do with it. Bearing in mind as well, worth bearing in mind, it has extra features, like the mix here is literally a wet and dry, so that means you can do parallel compression within the channel strip straight away. So
it was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever
compression.
gave a damn, but knew it had to stop.
It's dry.
It's all he got, cloaked heavy intrepidation. The baby on his block hotter than
Fully
Serengeti
wet,
Nation,
but
already
somewhere in
chasing
between.
what could put him up in right goods. So he do nothing like this, so he could spike her. Swore he do no wrong and
because
never
it's quite
ever
compressed
would be
already
like
before,
her.
I
Now
think that
he
could
the
work
one who
really
cannot
well,
put
that
down
kind
a
of.
light.
And here your HPF itself, it's basically a low pass for the threshold. So typically, if you wanted to put that on a drum bus and you didn't want the compressor to trigger the kick drum, to trigger the compressor, then you would move that above the kick, and that means the kick wouldn't be compressed, and that would start compressing anything above that frequency that I'm setting On vocal, usually not often necessary, unless there's a real issue with the sound source to start with. Great, so that's for our dynamic. And obviously here the dynamic, you can meter gain reduction and the signal being... so you see, that's my gate setting. If I wanted a more...
It was his hood and that... It was his hood and that was his only...
Obviously here you see, this is typical of a badly set
heavy intrepidation, the bevy on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation, already chasing what could put him up and right good.
Let's go with that for now. So now we've got the EQ here, and you know, you've got that Neve EQ, that sound that, you know, a lot of people love. It can be very important. That means typically you would tend to compress, and then you'd rather compress because obviously if you start EQing, the compressor is going to react to your EQ. And it's very valid in pop music to do that sometimes. You know, you boost the kick, the bass on the kick or the bass, and then you compress that afterwards, and it gives you a certain sound, you know, that kind of like overly compressed sound, but it's still really maintained and kept under control by the compressor. But often you would tend to compress first and EQ afterwards to rebalance, or, you know, different ways, different needs. So really useful to have that. In SC means that it's becoming the sidechain, the EQ. That means you could define certain frequencies, and it's only those ones that trigger the dynamic. Typically, it's a way to create a de-esser, for example, by isolating in the EQ the S's, and then the compressor only compresses this narrow frequency that you've created. Otherwise, what do we have? Okay, the top end goes from 17K here up to 17K, but you shelve or peak, so shelving here, peak like that. And in peak mode, you've got an IQ, so that takes you from 0.7 or 2 when you've got an IQ, meaning a more narrow Q for a parametric EQ. And I've added, let's add a little bit of top end, you know, 17K, really high, just to open up the sound a little bit on the vocal. You've got the mid here, I mean, typical parametric EQ, you know, very simple to use, and the same for the low here. So now let's put it in.
It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop.
So that's before the channel.
Heavy intrepidation, the bevy on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation, already chasing what could put him up and right goods. So he do nothing like this so he could spite her, so he do no wrong.
Works nice, in my opinion.
It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop. It's all he got, looked heavy intrepidation.
So let's play a little bit with it in practice just to see what we're getting here. The kick, I'd like to control it a little bit more, so I'm going to put a bit of compression.
Now he the one who cannot put down a light. It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop.
And again, you know, that's your typical trick that you would do on SSL or NIVDES that have a dynamic section. Notice here, compressing and then closing the gate. Again, I'm closing the gate. The reason I'm closing the gate is because I've got the noise here. So we're doing that. Then maybe let's tighten up the bottom end a little bit. So I'm going to do that. Filtering a little bit at 35. I mean, it's a big sub, but I just want to tighten up a bit, not to be too loose. And the compression is really doing that for me now. As you can hear, I mean, let's take off the low pass. And the compression here. You hear the resonance of the 808. I mean, it's great, you know, but one way often that I would tend to deal with sub-bass, and you need to, because sub-bass is where the energy, and that's moving your driver, you know, your speaker's driver, and that's really gonna move a lot of air. So compression is a really good way, really good way to keep that under control. And often I would use that before EQ. And that often would be just enough to keep it really nice and tight. That means you're still getting the fat bottom end, but instead it's being kept under control with the compression. You hear the difference? And then I'm going to bring... And I'm happy with that. Now, I thought the clap maybe were a little bit, just a little bit heavy, but again, having them a little bit more under control.
So he do nothing like this so he can
Let's look
spike
at the
her.
bass. Let's put this gate. I wanted to show you something. Again, really hard to hear on the speakers as I'm here, so maybe if we could push the speakers a little bit more for me, that'd be great. Thanks, Stu. Let's put, if I was putting, and again I'm doing the same trick here, noticing with the bass, and that really works.
So he do nothing like this so he could spite her. Swore he do no wrong and never ever would be like her. Now he the one who cannot put
So
down.
you see, it is quite subtle what we're ending up with, but what I really like, it has brought all the elements just that little bit more together. And the fact that, what I really like we're saying, you know, it's the fact that it's the same across, the same EQ, the same. It really helps getting that glue that we're always aiming for when mixing, which sometimes may be digital. I think, you know, mixing in a box is absolutely fine nowadays, you know, we're not going to go into there. But it's true that you have a lot more separation, you know. Here you're getting a little bit of that analogness, which is a little bit looser maybe, a little bit more, not quite sure how to describe it, but it's that thing that, you know, makes it different, not as clinical, not as very, very specific. You know, and that to me is part of this analogness, if you like. So yeah, well worth checking this plugin. I think I've gone pretty much an overview of the entire plugin. It works really well. I mean, you've got a phase button here, you've got a fader. You know, I like the interface. It works really well. You can map it. So if you had a nice controller, you could easily map it and suddenly work as if you were working on the desk. So yeah, well worth checking in my opinion. It's a really lovely plugin. Love the sound of it. I think, you know, they've gone in great detail. It's subtle, but in great detail. One of the things to finish off, I think, and maybe the best way to highlight that is, let's go back to our vocal maybe. One thing about analog EQ is that you can kind of push them, you can kind of abuse them a little bit more that maybe you would with digital EQ. You really can. I think it's part of the feature of working on the desk, you know. Often mixing on desk I would have parallel where I would over EQ something to bring some mid and a bit of distortion and harmonic distortion and blend that with the original channel. And there's some really lovely stuff that you can do. And it seems to me that with analog EQ, especially with Neve, you can really push them and they always sound musical. It never sound overdoing it. So let's have a listen.
And that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop. It's all he got, cloaked heavy in trepidation. The bevy on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation. Already chasing what could put him up
I've
and
boosted by 17
So he
dB.
do nothing like this so he could spite her. Swore he
But
do
it's
no
still-
wrong and never ever would be like her. Now he the one who cannot put down the light.
6 dB
It was
sounds
his
quite
hood,
musical
and that was
still.
his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to
You
stop.
see, there's something, and I
It's
think
all he got,
for me
cloaked heavy.
that's one of the feature of those, you know, using, because the EQ is really, really musical as well. So well worth checking for all those features. And if you're after that sound, let's put it
was
back in
his
the
hood, and
context.
that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop. It's all he got, cloaked heavy in trepidation. The bevy on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation. Already chasing what could put him up in right goods. Swore he do nothing like this so he could spite her. Swore he do no wrong and never ever would be like her. Now he the one who cannot put down a light. It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but knew it had to stop. It's all he got, cloaked heavy in
Starting to sound pretty
trepidation.
cool.
The bevy on his block hotter than Serengeti Nation. Already chasing what could put him up in right goods. Swore he do nothing like this so he could spite her. Swore he do no wrong and never ever would be like her. Now he the one who cannot put down a light. It was his hood, and that was his only pops, only one that ever gave a damn, but
So you see, with these two control of the threshold, they take a bit of while to get used, but I managed now to get rid of the breath as well, the heavy breath. So, you know, it allows you to really define and refine all those settings. So yes, please, check the plugin if you like it, post any question if you want on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll do our best to answer. And bear in mind that we've just started from today until the 9th of January, 20% off discount on our online courses. Have a lovely weekend, and see you very soon. Bye for now.